All right, bringing in Bill Koch, Providence Journal. So much to get to. Your expertise on URI basketball and the Red Sox. You cover both those teams. Let's start with Rhodey. A month out from Selection Sunday, Bill. Hard to believe. 32 in the net right now. Joe Lunardi has them in safely as a 9 seed into the NCAA tournament. Jerry Palm has them first 4 out. Where do you see their tournament status?
I'm much more toward Lunardi than I am Palm. I think Rhode Island, if the season ends today, is safely in the field of 68. I think they've done enough in terms of playing a good non-conference schedule, avoiding bad losses, and winning some of the games that they're supposed to win.
All right, so let's say they win every game besides Dayton. They start playing on Friday in the 8-10, but they lose in the semifinals or finals. If they don't have another Dayton win, you still think they're okay?
Safely in, yes.
Okay.
I would think so.
All right. Right now, I think this team's been pretty consistent throughout this year, Bill. Where do you see their upside being their ceiling? And is this team getting better right now? Could they do some damage in March?
Well, the defense has been very good, a top 25 defense in the country right now. I think the area of growth for them has always been on the offensive side. I think we saw a 6-game run there where they shot 46% or better in each game. And I think that's the end of the floor where you could see them continue to develop. They certainly have the guards to do it with Jeff Doughton and Fats Russell. And I think if you see NCAA tournament teams that are poised to win games in March, that's usually the thing they have in common, is that great guard play.
What does it say about David Cox, the year hiatus from the tournament with Dan Hurley leaving? Should he get them there, that they're back so quickly?
I think it's excellent. And largely I think it's everything that URI could have expected of him, from the standpoint that he was hired because he was qualified to run the program. He had served alongside Dan Hurley. He had recruited a lot of these guys and had relationships with them. Obviously had an X&O background. He was doing a lot of the scouting for Dan and doing a lot of the game plans for Dan. So I think he was a very well-rounded candidate, somebody who they identified as a person who could keep this going. And I think he's done a very nice job of doing that.
All right, so the tournament teams in 17 and 18 versus, let's assume this is a tournament team. How does this team compare against those? I
don't know if these guys are as dynamic offensively. They don't necessarily have as many options at that end of the floor. Defensively, they might be a little bigger team. They certainly have more front court options, I would think. They're a little more physical on that side. I think they might have the player with the best upside in Fats Russell. He's probably the most likely guy out of that whole group who could get you 30 points against an elite opponent. He did it at West Virginia earlier this year as a good example. So you turn Fats loose in a first-round game against a Power 5 opponent, I think he could keep you in with just about anybody.
All right, let's switch gears to PC. We saw them get a huge win over Seton Hall last night. How many wins over ranked teams?
5 Quadrant 1 wins so far.
So they have such a unique resume because they have so many good wins, so many bad losses, so no one knows what to do with them. Right now they're not in the tournament if you read the bracketologist. Is there still a path?
There's a path because of their schedule and who they play, but they've been so confounding to this point. That's the way I describe them. They've been so inconsistent throughout. You could see them beating anybody or losing to anybody. So realistically, I wouldn't be betting my mortgage on Providence's tournament chances, but I wouldn't bet against them either.
Yeah, there's still some big wins opportunity in the Big East. All right, let's switch gears to the Red Sox. We haven't touched base in what I describe as perhaps a debacle of an offseason. You were pretty critical of the Mookie Betts, David Price trade in the Providence Journal. What are your thoughts on it now that it's simmered a bit?
I just generally think that when you're making a trade, if the best player is no longer on your team, you have lost the trade. I think Mookie's a generational talent. And I also think that by trading him, you're never going to re-sign him again in free agency. I think you've burned that bridge by sending him away from the organization, the only one that he has known. I think Boston saw that they weren't necessarily going to be able to extend him early, and they decided to get whatever they could for him. For me, I would have chosen a different path. I would have held on, waited until July. Maybe you're in contention, you still have talent on your team. If you're not, then you entertain some offers then, and ideally you start a little bit of a bidding war between 2 or 3 teams who think that they can get into October.
All right, as for the managerial situation, Ron Renneke has the interim tag pending that investigation. What do you think comes out of the investigation, and is Ron Renneke here long term?
I think Ron Renneke is the perfect interim answer for them. He was a bench coach for the last 2 years. He has established relationships with the players. He's managed before in Milwaukee. He led the Brewers to the National League Championship Series in 2011. So he has good experience in that regard. As far as what the investigation will find, your guess is as good as mine. I'm not necessarily sure that they're going to get hit as hard as the Astros did.
Right.
But it did already cost them their manager. So how much more could it possibly hurt?
Chris Sale spoke to the media today. He was battling, a host of things. And you look at him, a lot of question marks, Nathan Eovaldi question marks, the whole starting rotation.
Right.
What are Red Sox fans expecting February 16th or whatever today's date with that rotation?
Well, if those guys are healthy, you could compete for a wild card and possibly even the division if you overperform and the Yankees, maybe don't do what everyone expects them to do. If they struggle with injury again, whether it's Sale, Eovaldi, if Eduardo Rodriguez isn't as great as he was last season.
So who's your 4 or 5 right now?
Martin Perez, who they signed on a one-year deal with an option, is a guy who they like, who has a little bit of upside. After that, your guess is as good as mine. Again, I use that phrase again, but in terms of the Red Sox, there are just a lot of questions right now about their roster and about where their organization is going to be going into the season.
With all the chaos with the manager and the investigation and the trade, they still have a good lineup.
Yes.
So they can win some games. I always remind people of Minnesota last year, came out of nowhere and won a ton of games. What is your over-under on how many wins this team gets?
I don't think it's unrealistic to say that they could push 90 wins.
Okay.
Maybe a little less. Because you have to remember, the league doesn't have much of a middle class.
Right.
The Red Sox were the only team to win in the 80s last year in the American League. Everyone else was either 90 or above, 80 or less. Teams are either really trying to compete or really trying to tank and stock up draft picks and prospects and whatever else. Boston is sort of in that middle region. But because of the talent that they do have in the everyday lineup, they should be able to go out and be good. Now, all that could change in July if they're somewhat out of contention and Chaim Bloom decides that he's going to sell.
All right, it's an interesting upcoming year for the Red Sox. He's Bill Koch. You can read him in the Providence Journal and online at projo.com. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you.